Hey crew, here we are with math lesson number 6. So we are going to be working on comparing and ordering fractions. And decimals, because that's what we're mostly talking about here. We're delving into the world of decimals. All right. So if we have fractions and decimals that we want to compare, and maybe those fractions aren't 1/10 or 1/100, we can always use a number line to compare them. So this number line on the top, we've got them split into halves, and on the bottom, obviously we've got it split into decimal tenths. Okay, so you might be asked in your math book to look to see whether a decimal is closer to 0, closer to 1/2, or closer to 1. So that should hopefully be pretty self-explanatory. 0.2 is closer to 0. 0.4 would be closer to 1/2. 0.9 would be closer to 1. 0.6 would be closer to 1/2. Kind of the fun thing that I've tried to point out a couple of times takes place right here, where you might notice that 1/2 and 0.5 happen at exactly the same place. So there is a big, fat, fancy math word for when two numbers mean the same amount. There's a few different words, but the biggest word, equivalent. Okay, and equivalent starts out with the equa, right, which means equal, and you could also say same. So 1/2 and 0.5 are equivalent because they're equal, or they are the same amount of stuff, right? So we're thinking about our cakes. Here we have one cake, one whole cake, and here we have 5/10 of the cake. Oh, look at that, which just happens to be half of the cake. So it's the same amount of stuff. So even though we're looking at different kinds of numbers, it really all comes back to how much stuff do you really have, okay? How much cake are you going to be able to eat? Because cake's where it's at. Okay, we can also compare a fraction and a number to see which is bigger, and there are 3 symbols that we could use to figure that out. We've used them all before. We got that one, we got that one, and we've got that one. Okay, so for the equal sign, right, it's when there's the same amount of stuff on each side. The crocodile signs, really, anyway, there's better names for them, but it's always so much more fun to think of them as crocodiles. And the crocodiles, they want to eat the most stuff, right? So if there was 5 fishies on this side and only 3 fishies on this side, crocodile wants to eat the 5 fishies, so his open mouth is where he's going to eat the most, right? Okay, so here's Mr. Crocodile. There's his teeth. He is ready to eat some fishies. He doesn't want just 3 pesky little fishies. He wants more fishies. This crocodile gets to eat 6 fishies. Okay, so those are your choices when we are comparing 2 numbers to see which one is bigger. But always keep in mind, there is the off chance where they might actually both be the same thing. Okay, so when we're comparing numbers, we can, we can use a number line. There we go, sorry, a little camera adjustment there. Okay, we can use a number line, and we've got a whole bunch of number lines going on this one. Tried to draw them all at once so you wouldn't have to watch me painstakingly draw in number lines for you. Okay, so this is kind of where we're going to start at the bottom, and we're going to work our way up to the top. So we're going to do this one first. So we're comparing 0.1 with 0.01. Okay, so when we're comparing two numbers using our number lines, the first thing we have to do is we have to figure out where each of them is on their number lines. Okay, so here's 0.1 and then 0.01. So this one's in the hundredths one, so we need the number line that is 100 little ticks. Look at that forest of little ticks there. And it's only one of them in. Okay. You'll notice how all of the zeros on the number line up. If you're using number lines to compare, they've got to be the same thing. So all the ones line up and all the zeros line up, so that means you can accurately use the middle stuff to figure out which is bigger. Okay, so we figured out where they are on the number line, and then we look to see who is farther right, right? Because obviously as we go this way, the numbers are getting bigger. So 0.1 is closer to the right, so it's more stuff, so the alligator wants to eat that one. This one's actually pretty easy to compare if we go back to thinking about our cake, right? 0.1 is that much cake. It's 1/10 of the cake, one whole stripe. 0.01 is just one tiny little piece of the cake. It's not 10 pieces, it's just one teeny tiny little piece. So it's going to be a whole lot less. All right. Next up, we are comparing 0.7 to 0.70. Okay, so we're going to find them on their number line. So this one's looking at tenths. So we look for the one that's just split into 10 pieces. Here it is, there's 0.7. Okay, now we want 0.70, so 71 hundredths. We look at the one that is split into 100 tiny little pieces. And here it is, 71 hundredths. Oh. Alright, what symbol is going to go in between there? Which one of those is farther to the right? Now, hopefully you're saying, Miss Hughes, you're crazy. Neither of them are farther to the right. 0.7 is exactly the same thing as 0.70. It is equal or equivalent. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 tenths right here. Do I have enough? Okay, and 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70. Oh, look at that. It's the same amount of cake right there. All right, let's get rid of those ones. Okay, so those are just kind of warming us up. Now we're thinking about it. Get rid of those little arrows. We don't need those anymore. Okay, so now we're going to compare 0.2 and 1/4. Okay, so here's the quarter along the top here. Oh, just a brief point. 2/4 would be equivalent to which fraction halfway along there? 1/2. Okay, so 1/4 is here. 0.2 on the tenths one. 0.2 is here. Now you can always use a ruler if they're close. You know, you can slide it over. Okay, we're at the first one. Oh, looks like 1/4 is farther to the right. So it's a bigger amount. That's what the crocodile wants to eat. He's going to go that way. Okay, next two numbers, 0.65. All right, so you practice hopefully putting hundredths onto a number line so we can count by tenths. So here's 10 100ths, 20 100ths, 30 100ths, 40 100ths, 50 100ths, 60 100ths. So we have to count 61, 62, 63, 64, 65. So it's going to be right in the middle here. That guy. Okay, and 3/4. Here we are, 3/4. Just going to get rid of that so it's not confusing. Okay, and then we can use our ruler, slide it over, get to the first one. All right, then we can see who is farther over. So 3/4 is farther over to the right. It's a bigger number. So whoever's bigger gets the open mouth. That works just fine. Now what if we want to compare a fraction and a decimal, but we don't have a number line? Or our number line doesn't have the right stuff on it. Huh. Okay. We, first of all, then have to use our smarts to turn the fraction into a decimal, right? So we knew that if we had half of our cake, right, we had 1/2, we knew that that would be the same thing as 5 out of the 10 strips. Sorry, that's terrible drawing, but you kind of know what I mean. We also know that 1/2 is the same thing as 0.5. And we also know that that would be the same thing as 50 out of 100. So we could either call it 0.5 or 0.50. All of those statements, they all have equal signs between them. So those are all equivalent numbers, or numbers that mean the same amount of cake. Okay, so one way is to think about our cakes when we are turning numbers into decimal. So what if we have, let's use an actual cake instead of drawing. Okay, we've got our actual cake here, and we have been asked to find 1/5 of our cake. Okay, so I know 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. It's got 10 rows. 10 divided by 5. 2 rows would be 1/5. Okay, so 1/5 is going to be the same thing as 2 out of 10, which is also, of course, the same thing if we count each little piece of cake. That's like saying 20 pieces out of the whole 100 pieces of cake. Okay, so once we know what 1/5 is, well, if we have 2/5, I mean, we just have twice as much cake, right? So we can add more. So now we would have 4/10 of the cake, or we could say it as 41/100 of the cake, right? That would all be the same amount of stuff. Okay, so we can use our cakes to help us think about how much stuff it is when we are turning a fraction into a decimal. Or there is also a sneaky way that you can do it where you need a well, you don't have to have a calculator, but it can make your life a little bit easier. So if you look closely at the dividing sign, you'll notice it's a straight line with something above and something below. Oh, if I look at a fraction, it'll look kind of similar. It's got the straight line in the middle. There's something above and something below. So here is a sneaky thing that we might not have mentioned yet. The middle line in a fraction also can mean one thing, 1 pi, divided into 2. So you could take 1 and divide it by 2. So of course we could do that this way. Divided that. You're not quite there yet because we're still building our decimals, but we can look up here and we know that 1/2 in decimals is also equal to 0.5. So if you were thinking of, say, well, our 1/4, if we took 1 and used a calculator and divided it by 4, like $1, and we divide it into 4 coins, each coin is worth 25 cents, which we write like this. Okay, so if you have a calculator at home, then you can go ahead and try that out, and you can turn any fraction into a decimal by taking the top number and dividing it by the bottom number. So if we have to compare different types of numbers, the first thing we want to do is make them all the same. So let's say we've been given 3/4, 0.4, and 0.5. 0.62. Okay, we need to make them all the same kind of number. So we can either make them all fractions that have the same denominator, or we can make them all decimals. So it might be easiest for us to think about fractions to start with. So quarters, if we were to divide our cake into quarters, each quarter would be 5 times 5, which is 25 pieces of cake. I've got 3 of those, so 25, 50, 75. So I have 75 pieces out of 100 pieces of cake. Okay, 0.4. This time on my cake, I'm going to ice 4 strips of them, right, which I can turn into hundredths by counting by tens, 10, 20, 30, 40. So 0.4 is the same thing as 40 100ths. Now if I have 62 pieces of cake, then I need to cover up a bit more. All right, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, plus 2 more, 62 100ths. Okay, so now I can figure out which one is the most stuff, because they're all talking about hundredths, so now we can compare the same things. So if I was asked to put that in order from least to greatest, I would know that 40 100ths is the smallest. I might be asked to turn them all into decimals first. Hopefully by this point it's starting to get really easy to take our hundredths and turn them into decimals, right? We know that this has to be less than 1, so we just write those numbers after the decimal point. Okay, we just take those numbers and just put them right in here. Okay, so now if I want to write the decimals in order from least, so least is equal to the smallest, up to greatest, which would be the biggest. The smallest amount of cake that was covered is this guy, right? So 0.40 would be the smallest. The next biggest amount of cake would be this guy, right? It had 6 strips. Okay. The next biggest number would be 0.75. Okay. Hopefully that makes sense, because it's kind of like comparing 40, 62, and 75 to see which number would be bigger, right? We don't just look at what number's in the ones column, we look at which number is in the tens column to help us know which number is bigger. So just like here, we can look in the hundredths column, but the tenths column, any number that's to the left is going to help us show that that's bigger, right? Hopefully that makes sense. Okay, so coming up next, it's your turn to get some practice in. So if you have a blue math book, you're going to do page 272, page 273, and page 274. If you get stuck and you forget, maybe rewatch this lesson, because I've told you everything you need to know for all 3 pages. Green math book, you're going to do page 230, page 231, and page 232. And again, I'll make another video where I read the questions for the green math book pages. Okay, you guys are ready for some math? If you get stuck, let me know. We can do more. Okay, happy mathing.